Alrighty, welcome everyone to today's webinar where we'll be talking about two teaching strategies that have something of a relationship and are quite often used together. And you'll see how they come together and get used in that way in a very short period of time. The first one that I'm going to be talking about is what is known as deliberate practice. It also goes under another name, purposeful practice. So you might hear either of those two those two terms floating around. And the second strategy that I'll be talking about is whole part whole learning. Now, quite often whole part whole learning, again, that can go under various different names, such as just whole part learning or part whole learning. I've heard a few different ways of describing that, but basically I like to use the whole part whole process there. And I might actually even just start over here and do this in reverse. Now, whole part whole obviously has three different parts to it. 1, 2, and 3. And that may seem obvious, but I really just want to emphasize that there's an actual procedure or process to this particular strategy that is very important to be adhered to so that you get the full benefit of this particular strategy. Now, the first one there is the whole. Now, what that basically is some type of model. Now, by model, I mean the expert, whoever that expert is, whether it's a teacher or a teacher aide or a trainer or whoever, shows the students a model for what they are going to be producing or what the end result is of their learning. So this is something of a goal, an example of a goal. Now that can be drawing it on the board and using a worked example to show a maths problem. It can be providing an example of how to write a paragraph. It can be an example of how to shoot a pool cue. It can be a whole range of different things there. But the most important thing is that there is a specific period of time set aside for the expert to go through and show students exactly what the end product is going to be. And also the procedure, so there's some modelling there. There's a procedure for how to go about doing it. Now, quite often that can be at full pace, or it can actually be at almost full pace, say 70% of the full pace. And that is what we call an expert example or a model example. And students can then see that this is the procedure that an expert would go through. This is what it looks like for an expert to be able to do something. And that gives them something of a context to be able to go on and practice it themselves when we get to that part there. Okay, so the part here is, this part at the top is the teacher-centered part. And the second part is really the student-centered part. And this is all about practice. So I'm just going to write doing. So this is all about the doing part of it. So the student goes through and completes various different aspects of that particular task, usually either while they're guided by the teacher or supervised by the teacher or teacher aide or whoever. And quite often they do it in parts. So they will do it in parts. Now what that means is that the actual end product will be chunked down into small little sections. And I've got an example for you here. So this is a little box that I made when I went and did a woodworking course a few months ago. Now, well, yeah, a few months, 6 months ago or something like that. I'm no expert at woodworking, that's for sure. And while this hopefully looks really good on camera, up close the little nails aren't straight and all those types of things. But this was my first foray, I guess, into learning from some experts how to do a little bit of woodworking, at least since the few things that I did in high school, which I don't really remember anyway. Now, basically, they went through and showed us an example, so a best model of what this looks like at the very end. So they had an example that one of their experts or one of one of their experts had done, and they passed that around and we were able to look at it and then see, okay, that's what a perfect model would look like. When I go through and do this, I need it to be able to approach that sort of level, even though there's no chance in a million years I was going to get to that standard. At least it gave me an idea, and it gave all the other students in the class an idea of what we wanted to do. And then it was divided down into different chunks. I've got a video on chunking, so definitely watch that one. In this particular strategy, it's called a part. So the first thing you would do with this particular project, from memory actually, was cutting out the base. So they'd go through and they'd show us how to use the table saw and all this kind of stuff. And you would then wait in line, and one student at a time would cut the little bit of wood at the bottom to make the right size base. From there, I think it was cutting up each of the different sides, so it was making the right sized cut and so forth, and so on and so on. So they went through and did it in little processes. Now, this particular project was over 2 sessions of 2 hours from memory, just to give you something of an idea. And one of the last processes was obviously oiling it up and all that kind of stuff. So I'll just put that one down there. But that gives you an idea of how you can divide things into parts so that you get to the whole in the end and then be able to put it together. Now, the idea with this process is that you learn how to do it, or at least you get shown how to do it. Then you do it in parts to practice, and then you can do it in one big go at the end, all on your own independently. So if you've seen my scaffolding videos, you will know that we start with the levels of instruction, which is a type of scaffolding. You start with modelling at the start, and then it goes to some type of, not guided, it goes to shared. So it goes to shared learning, where it is being, I usually put these together though, shared or guided learning. Where shared learning is where the trainer or expert does part of it, and then guided learning is where they're not actually doing any aspect of it, but they're guiding the student in a way. So it goes shared, guided, and then hopefully it gets to the bit where the student can do it independently. And eventually there's one more level after that, which is where the student is able to go through and not only do, say, that project, but then they've got the skills and knowledge to be able to independently go and do the next project without even needing the teacher. So that's called self-directed learning, which is the very last one, self-directed learning. So that is a type of like a scaffolding procedure or scaffolding process that can take, say, one lesson or whatever. Now, that whole is really the modelling, and then the part is kind of that bit there, the shared and guided, as the student does each little individual aspect of it. Sometimes they do, it gets more, I guess, more difficult and challenging as you go through those individual parts, and then sometimes, like these projects, it's simply just dividing the actual project into, say, 5 sections or 20 sections or whatever. But from a planning perspective, if you're teaching someone how to do a product like that, or any other tasks in a school, dividing that up into small little sections is the most important aspect of that part, and then having that student practice that in parts while there is some type of scaffolds or some type of involvement from the trainer's perspective, and there's lots of feedback and so on and so forth. And from there, you then get to number 3, which is the whole. Oops, I don't need to rewrite that. Now, when you get to the whole, what that means is it's a finished product in real time. So that means that the student, does real time have a dash in the middle? Yes, I'm going with a yes. So that means that the student is going to be able to then do that product on their own. So if it's that woodworking product I was talking about there, it would mean that I can then go off and then do my own little box on my own without any help or assistance from the trainer. That's basically what that means. So and sometimes, I mean, these things, we don't have to be ideological or purist about it, right? So sometimes here, you'll get, well, mainly at this bit, sometimes at this whole end bit here, students will then go through and do their own, but it doesn't mean that there can't be any assistance or there can't be any scaffolds or dividing that down. But basically, from a simplistic perspective, it means that there are 3 steps in the process, knowing that anything we do in education always, nothing ever fits neatly into those perfect little categories. So I wouldn't be saying that, well, we're up to doing the parts section, so I'm never going to model anything ever again. It doesn't really work like that. Obviously, we provide instruction and strategies based on the individual needs of students. But from a simplistic point of view, that's how the whole part whole sort of works, with the view that the student can view it here, practice it, and then be able to do that same thing there. So that's that end goal. Almost like the end goal is then demonstrated at the start. Well, not almost, it is demonstrated at the start. So that's whole part whole. Now, another example I wanted to talk about is playing pool, because I think everyone's played at least one game of pool in their life. Now, I'm certainly no expert at pool, probably no more of an expert than I am at woodwork. But I just want you to have a think about in your own time after you've watched this video, how something as simple as playing pool or teaching a student how to play pool. I remember teaching year, I think it was 10s, that we would go down to once every couple of months or so. Their reward excursion was to go and play pool for a couple of hours on a Friday afternoon at the pool hall. So as part of that process, just think about how you could use whole part whole to teach someone who's never played pool before how to actually shoot a ball, just the very basics of it. You're not aiming to become experts here. So just have a think about that. Now, this leads me into talking about the next one, which is deliberate practice, because deliberate practice is easiest explained if we're talking about doing something fine motor or gross motor, such as being able to shoot a pool ball. Now, deliberate practice, also known as purposeful practice, as I was saying before, is specifically used when you're trying, or the student is trying to improve a skill, actively trying to improve on that skill, such as learning how to play pool. Because you can go and play pool and play thousands and thousands of games over 10 or 20 years, and you'll get a little bit better, but you're not going to get significantly better, or nowhere near as better as if you were doing deliberate practice. And let me demonstrate this on a quick little graph, because I just like using graphs for these types of things. So say this is weeks, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So over an 8-week period, a particular person goes and plays pool, say for 8 different hours, and let's say this little part down here means skill. So the student's skill kind of goes like that. It might go up a little bit, but not really. They're more so just playing pool in order to socialise and so on and so forth. Their skills aren't really going to go anywhere. There's a little bit of an increase towards the end, or, as they've practiced a few things, but generally not so much. Now, with deliberate practice, a person's skills goes like that. And I might be exaggerating here a little bit, but it does actually go like that, and to some extent anyway. And the reason for that is that at the end of, say, the first week, when the student's done a little bit of practice, with deliberate practice, they will be actively thinking about improving at certain aspects of that particular skill. So they may decide that because of the advice they got from some type of expert, that they want to improve on their stance, or they want to improve on how they aim the ball up, or something like that. If it's to do with woodworking, you're deliberately trying to get better. You might be concentrating on the accuracy of your cuts, for example, or using different types of wood. So you're improving not only your skill, but also your knowledge, which is very different to just churning out thousands and thousands of boxes that are pretty much the same. Now, the example that I like to use all the time with deliberate practice is professional sports people, or not even professionals, but people that are trying to get better and better at sports. What they generally do, instead of just going through the motions and just doing the same thing tens of thousands of times, say someone who was also playing golf. If you were just the casual golf player who played every Saturday, over a period of, say, 8 years, you're probably not going to improve that much. You will certainly get better, and there'll be a bit of an uptrend, but nowhere near as much as if you were doing deliberate practice. So And what that basically, how that looks like is that person who has deliberately practiced, deliberately trying to get better at what they're doing. And they're doing things like watching YouTube videos, they're taking advice from experts, they're breaking down the tasks into smaller steps, so into tiny little steps. Now, that's probably one of the main advantages of deliberate practice. So one, there is specific goals. So watch my videos on goal setting. So that's specific goals. So that means that you might set an aim to be at, say, this sort of level of skill. So if we are talking about golf, so that's the goal point. If we are talking about golf, then maybe here you're looking at, I don't know, that might be, say, a 6. You're scoring a 6 over par on average or whatever. So at least you've got that specific goal, because obviously that is just never ending. So it's really important to set those goals. Watch my videos on goals and that will hopefully make a lot more sense. The other thing is it's active. So it's what is known as active learning. So active learning means that you're specifically doing something to learn, specifically doing something to improve. That's as opposed to specifically doing something simply for the social reason or for enjoyment or whatever. Active learning doesn't mean you can't enjoy it, but it does mean that there is that psychological, I guess, aspect to it, or that mindset. 3 is there are expert models. Whoop. Good catch, Adam. Expert models and advice. So you're taking advice from a range of different people and continually trying to improve in various different ways, such as by getting feedback. And number 4 is massed practice. 5 specific aspects. Yeah, so number 5 and 6 are really important, particularly, where am I going to put that? Particularly number 4. So mass practice basically means that you're practicing a very specific thing or very specific aspect of it over and over again. So if you were learning how to, say, we'll go with the golf example. If you were learning how to play golf, you might make the decision that, well, the one aspect that I'm not very good at is putting. So you might decide to practice putting the same, exactly the same hole, the same distance, hundreds and hundreds of times. So you might do 200 little putts from the exact same position. So you'll slowly and gradually get better at that over a period of time. Now, if you were just going out for a casual swing on a Saturday, playing with friends and things, you will practice a bunch of putts, but once you've hit it once, you'll never stop and think about how you could do it slightly better again. Or you will, but nowhere near to the extent as if you were deliberately practicing that one small aspect. So that is an important part of deliberate practice, is that there's a massive amount of practice, or not a massive amount, but it's called massed practice anyway. There's mass practice of a specific aspect of the actual trait, so of the actual task. So you're dividing down, say, playing golf into various different sections. And again, you can see how that relates to whole part whole, because you're dividing down playing golf. So there's the whole, and you're dividing it down into small parts. So you've got putting, you've got hitting out of a bunker, you've got whatever else. So that's why doing the specific part of it is really important. And I guess that comes down to chunking. Yeah, so that kind of relates to chunking as well, specific aspects and chunking down a particular task into lots of nice, neat little sections so you can concentrate on and master each of those little sections one at a time. And I guess that means that we should also do an example as far as working in schools is concerned. If you're doing more of an academic, I'll get rid of this. So if you're doing more of an academic, like you're helping students to read or do maths, I tend to find that maths is the easiest one to be able to use here. So deliberate practice, if we're doing, I think the last video I was doing, we were doing graphs, where we wanted students to be able to draw a trend line on a graph. And I think in the example I was using in that last video, which was, I think it was about one-on-one instruction from memory. It was a while ago. Students were they needed to be able to draw a trend line. So they needed to be able to draw a line like that on a bunch of data to be able to draw that average or that line that goes through the middle of all the data points so that you could visually see that something was heading in a certain direction. So there's your graph. Okay, now deliberate practice. Now let's go over to whole part whole learning. So whole part whole learning for this would involve, is very simple. The teacher, teacher aide, whoever would do an example on the board, do some think alouds and go through and show the students what an actual master or expert model looked like. So this is how I would do it, yada, yada, yada. There might be a specific question, a maths question that they answer, and then the students would go and practice it in parts. So they would practice doing drawing that, drawing that, drawing that, drawing that, and so on and so forth. They might also then practice doing the titles and doing a caption, maybe writing a sentence or so to interpret it, things like that. So that whole process of taking some data, graphing it and interpreting it that's the part process there. And then hopefully at the end they'll be able to put it all together and do it in one smooth, fluid movement on their own while going through and doing some practices and stuff like that with some other examples. Now, deliberate practice would be relevant here where the student is having issues with a certain section of it, or you just simply wanted them to concentrate on mainly doing the graph line or even the interpretation, because quite often the interpretation is the hard part, being able to put into words what they're actually seeing here. So if the teacher or teacher aide actually gave the two titles down the side, so what the different axes meant, and then the teacher was required to then the student, was required to go through and write their interpretation just in a little box underneath. And you might give them, say, 6 or 7 examples of that. So that's an example of how deliberate practice would be used to improve at a specific skill within a larger task. Okay, cool. But mainly deliberate practice is used for more of those gross motor, fine motor skills, such as playing pool. Anyone who's an expert at playing pool, which I'm certainly not, spends most of their time actually practicing, not playing actual games, but practicing specific skills. So it will be shooting the same shot 100 times, building a wooden box or whatever, and practicing specific aspects of that, say doing perfect carts or whatever. So that's what deliberate practice is all about. I always think of deliberate practice as being about experts, or when I picture it, I picture sports people or people trying to get good at a specific physical type task as opposed to the academic, more paper-based type skills. But certainly it is applicable and something that I use quite regularly in the way that I plan out lessons and activities and the way in which I get people to, or students to, try and acquire and master different concepts and topics and things along those lines. So certainly these two do come in handy just to either use on a regular basis or to just have it sitting there so that if the opportunity presents itself, you are aware of these strategies and can make decisions about how you would implement them or whether you should implement them or use another one, because you're better off having them there and not using them than not knowing about them at all. So that's deliberate practice, or purposeful practice as it's commonly called, and whole part whole learning and how they relate to each other.